Alright, check Johnstone19.com here. We're on the continuation of this particular book reading, The End of the Institute, Chapter 20. What they saw first was an empty chair, an old-fashioned wingback placed in front of a wall with a framed courier and Ives sailing ship on it. Then a woman's face poked into the frame, staring at the lens. "That's her," Luke said. "That's Maureen, the lady who helped me get out." "Is this on?" Maureen said. "The little light's on, so I guess it is. I hope so, because I don't think I have the strength to do this twice." Her face left the strength. I'm sorry. Her face left the screen of the laptop computer the officers were watching. Tim found that something of a relief. The extreme close-up was like looking at a woman trapped inside a fishbowl. Her voice faded a bit, but was still audible. "But if I have to, I will." She sat down in the chair and adjusted the hem of her floral skirt over her knees. She wore a red blouse over it. Luke, who had never seen her out of her uniform, thought it was a pretty combination, but bright colors couldn't conceal how thin her face was or how haggard. "Max the audio," Frank Potter said. "She should have been wearing a lav mic." Meanwhile, she was talking. Tag reversed the video, turned up the sound, and hit play again. Maureen once more returned to the wingback chair and once more adjusted the hem of her skirt. Then she looked directly into the camera's lens. "Luke?" He was so startled by his name out of her mouth that he almost answered, but she went on before he could, and what she said next put a dagger of ice into his heart. Although he had known, hadn't he, just as he hadn't needed the Star Tribune to give him the news about his parents. "If you're looking at this, then you're out, and I'm dead." The deputy named Potter said something to the one named Faraday, but Luke paid no attention. He was completely focused on the woman who'd been his only grown-up friend in the Institute. "I'm not going to tell you my life story," the dead woman in the wingback chair said. "There's no time for that, and I'm glad, because I'm ashamed of a lot of it. Not of my boy, though. I'm proud of the way he turned out. He's going to college. He'll never know I'm the one who gave him the money, but that's all right. That's good the way it should be, because I gave him up. And Luke, without you to help me, I might have lost that money and that chance to do right by him. I only hope I did right by you." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "I will tell one part of my story because it's important. I was in Iraq during the Second Gulf War, and I was in Afghanistan, and I was involved in what was called enhanced interrogation." To Luke, her calm fluency, no uhs, no you knows, no kinda or sorta, was a revelation. It made him feel embarrassment as well as grief. She sounded so much more intelligent than she had during their whispered conversations during the ice machine because she had been playing dumb. Probably, he had seen a woman in a brown housekeeper's uniform and just assumed she didn't have a lot going on upstairs in the noggin. Not like me, in other words, Luke thought, and realized embarrassment didn't accurately describe what she was feeling. Or what he was feeling, I'm sorry. The right word for that was shame. "I saw waterboarding, and I saw men, women, too, a couple, standing in basins of water with electrodes on their fingers or up their rectums. I saw toenails pulled out with pliers. I saw a man shot in the kneecap when he spit in an interrogator's face. I was shocked at first, but after a while I wasn't. Sometimes when it was men who'd planted IEDs on our boys or sent suicide bombers into crowded markets, I was glad. Mostly I know the word, desensitized," Tim said. "Desensitized," Maureen said. "Christ, like she heard you," Deputy Burkett said. "Hush," Wendy said, and something about that word made Luke shiver. It was as if someone had said it just before her. He turned his attention back to the video. "Never took part after the first two or three, because they gave me another job. When they wouldn't talk, I was the kindly non-com who came in and gave them a drink or snuck them something to eat out of my pocket, a Quest bar or a couple of Oreos. I told them the interrogators had gone all off on a break or to eat a meal, and the microphones were turned off. I said I felt sorry for them and wanted to help them. I said that if they didn't talk, they would be killed. Even though it was against the rules, I never said against the Geneva Convention because most of them didn't know what that was. I said if they didn't talk, their families would be killed, and I really didn't want that. Usually it didn't work, they suspected, but sometimes when the interrogators came back, the prisoners told them what they wanted to hear, either because they believed me or wanted to. Sometimes they said things to me because they were confused, disoriented, and because they trusted me. God help me, I had a very trustworthy face. I know why she's telling me this, Luke thought. How I wound up at the Institute. The story's too long for a tired, sick woman to go into. Someone came to me, see me. Leave it at that. Not Mrs. Sigsbee, Luke, and not Mr. Stackhouse, not a government man either. He was old. He said he was a recruiter. He asked me if I wanted a job when my tour was over. Easy work, he said, but only for a person who could keep her lip buttoned. I'd been thinking about re-upping, but this sounded better, because the man said I'd be helping my country a lot more than I ever could in Sandland, so I took the job, and when they put me in housekeeping, I was okay with that. I knew what they were doing, but at first I was okay with that too, because I knew why. Good for me, because the Institute is like what they say about the Mafia. Once you're in, you can't get out. When I came up short on money to pay my husband's bills, and then I started to be afraid the vultures would take the money I'd saved for my boy, I asked for the job I've been doing downrange, and Mrs. Sigsbee and Mr. Stackhouse let me try. Tattling, Luke murmured. It was easy, like slipping an old pair of shoes on. I was there for 12 years, but only snitched the last 16 months or so, and by the end I was starting to feel bad about what I was doing. And I'm not just talking about the snitching part. I got desensitized in what we called the black houses, and I stayed desensitized in the institute, but eventually that started to wear off. The way a wax shine will wear off a car if you don't put on a fresh coat every now and then. They're just kids. You know, and kids want to trust a grown-up who's kind and sympathetic. It wasn't as if they had ever blown anybody up. They were the ones who got blown up, them and their families, but maybe I would have kept on with it anyway, if I'm going to be honest, and it's too late to be anything else. I guess I probably would have. But then I got sick, and I met you, Luke. You helped me, but that's not why I helped you. Not the only reason anyway, and not the main reason. I saw how smart you were, way beyond any of the other kids, way beyond the people who stole you away. I knew they didn't care about your fine mind, or your little sense of humor, or how you were willing to help an old sick bag like me, even though you knew it might get you in trouble. To them, you were just another cog in the machine, to be used until it were out. In the end, you would have gone the way of all the others, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, going all the way back to the beginning. Is she crazy? George Burkett asked. Shut up, Ashworth said. He was leaning forward over his belly, eyes fixed on the screen. Maureen had stopped to take a drink of water and then to rub her eyes, which were sunk deep in their hollows of flesh. Sick eyes, sad eyes, dying eyes, Luke thought, staring eternity right in the face. It was still a hard decision, and not just because of what they might do to me or to you, Luke. It was hard because if you do get away, if they don't catch you in the woods or in Denison River Bend, and if you can find someone to believe you, if you get past all those ifs, you might be able to drag what's been going on here for 50 or 60 years out into the open, bring it all down on their heads, like Samson in the temple, Luke thought. She leaned forward, looking directly into the lens, directly at him, and that might mean the end of the world. Now we're on chapter 21 of the end of the Institute. Hell is Waiting, a novel by Stephen King. The westering sun turned the railroad tracks running close to State Route 92 into pinkish red lines of fire and seemed to spotlight the sign just ahead. Welcome to DePrae, South Carolina, Fairleigh County seat, population 1,369. A nice place to visit and a nicer place to live. Denny Williams pulled the lead van onto the dirt shoulder. The others followed. He spoke to those in his own van. Mrs. Sigsbee, Dr. Evans, Michelle Robertson, then went to the other two. Radios off, earpieces out. We don't know what frequencies the locals or the states might be listening to. Cell phones off. This is now a sealed operation and will remain so until we are back at the airfield. He returned to the lead van, got back behind the wheel, and turned to Mrs. Sigsbee. All good, ma'am. All good. I am here under protest, Dr. Evans said again. Shut up, Mrs. Sigsbee said. Denny, let's go. They rolled into Fairleigh County. There were barns and fields and stands of pine on one side of the road, railroad tracks, and more trees on the other. The town itself was now just 2 miles away. Now we are on chapter 22 of the end of the Institute. Hell is Waiting. Corinne Rawson was standing in front of the screening room, shooting the shit with Jake the Snake Holland and Phil, the Pill, Shepitz. Abused as a child by both her father and two of her four older brothers, Corinne had never had a problem with her work and back half. She knew the kiddos called her Corinne the Slapper, and that was okay. She had been slapped plenty in the Reno trailer park where she had grown up, and the way she looked at it, what goes around comes around, plus it was good. It was for a good cause. What you called your basic win-win situation. Of course there were drawbacks to working in back half. For one thing, your head got jammed up with too much information. She knew that Phil wanted to fuck her, and Jake didn't because Jake only liked women with double-wide racks in front and extra junk in the trunk. And she knew that they knew she didn't want anything to do with either of them, at least not in that way. Since the age of 17, she had batted strictly for the other side. Telepathy always sounded great in stories and movies, but it was annoying as fuck in real life. It came with the hum, which was a drawback, and it was cumulative, which was a major drawback. The housekeepers and janitors swapped back and forth between front half and back half, which helped, but the red caretakers worked here and nowhere else. There were two teams, Alpha and Beta. Each worked 4 months on, then had 4 months off. Corinne was almost at the end of her current 4 month swing. She would spend a week or two decompressing in the adjacent staff village, recovering her essential self, and then would go to her little house in New Jersey, where she lived with Andrea, who believed her partner worked in a top secret military project. Top secret it was. Military it was not. The low level telepathy would fade during her time in the village, and by the time she got back to Andrea, it would be gone. Then, a few days into her next swing, it would start to creep back. If she had been able to feel sympathy, a sensibility that had been mostly beaten out of her by the age of 13, she would have felt it for Dr. Hallis and Dr. James. They were here almost all of the time, which meant they were almost constantly exposed to the hum, and you could see what it was doing to them. She knew that Dr. Hendricks, the Institute chief medical officer, gave the back half docs injections that were supposed to limit the constant erosion, but there was a big difference between limiting a thing and halting it. Horace Keller, a red caretaker with whom she was friendly, called Heckle and Jekyll high-functioning crazies. He said that eventually one or both of them would freak out, and then the topsiders would have to find fresh medical talent. There was nothing to Corinne. Her job was to make sure the kids ate when they were supposed to eat, went into their rooms when they were supposed to go to their rooms. What they did in there was also no concern of hers, attended the movies on movie nights and didn't get out of line. When they did, she slapped them down. The Gorks are restless tonight, Kate the Snake said. You can hear them in there. Tasers at the ready when we do the 8 o'clock feeding, right? They're always worse at night, Phil said. I don't. Hey, what the fuck? Corinne felt it too. They were used to the hum. The way you get used to the sound of a noisy fridge or a rattling air conditioner. Now suddenly it ramped up to the level they had to endure on movie nights that were also sparkler nights. Only on movie nights that mostly came from behind the closed and locked doors of Ward A, also known as Gorky Park. She could feel it coming from there now, but it was also coming from another direction, like the push of a strong wind from the lounge where those kids had gone to spend their free time when the show was over. First one bunch went down there, those who were still functioning, then a couple Corinne thought of as pre-gorks. What the fuck are they doing? Phil shouted. He put his hands to the sides of his head. Corinne ran for the lounge, pulling her zap stick. Jake was behind her. Phil, perhaps more sensitized to the hum, maybe just scared, stayed where he was, palms pressed to his temples as if to keep his brains from exploding. What Corinne saw when she got to the door was almost a dozen children. Even Iris Stanhope, who would certainly go to Gorky Park after tomorrow's movie, was there. They were standing in a circle, hands joined, and now the hum was strong enough to make Corinne's eyes water. She thought she could even feel her feelings vibrating. Get the new one, she thought, the shrimp. I think he's the one driving this. Zap him, and it might break the circuit. But even as she thought it, her fingers opened, and her zap stick dropped to the carpet. Behind her, almost lost in the hum, she heard Jake shouting for the kids to stop whatever they were doing and go to their rooms. The black girl was looking at Corinne, and there was an insolent smile on her lips. I'll slap that look right off you, missy, Corinne thought, and when she raised her hand, the black girl nodded. That's right, slap. Another voice joined Kalicia's slap. Then all the others, slap, slap, slap. Corinne Rothen began to slap herself, first with her right hand, then with her left, back and forth, harder and harder, aware that her cheeks were first hot and then burning, but that awareness was faint and far away, because now the hum wasn't a hum at all, but a huge blah of internal feedback. She was knocked to her knees as Jake rushed past her. Stop whatever you're doing, you fucking little... His hand swept up, and there was a crackle of electricity as he zapped himself between the eyes. He jerked backward, legs first splaying out, and then coming together in a funky dance floor move, eyes bulging. His mouth dropped open, and he plugged the barrel of his zap stick into it. The crackle of electricity was muffled, but the results were visible. His throat swelled like a bladder. Momentary blue light shone from his nostrils. Then he fell forward on his face, cramming the zap stick's slim barrel into his mouth all the way to the butt, his fingers still convulsing on the trigger. Kalisha led them into the resident corridor with their hands linked. Like first graders on a school outing, Phil, the pill, saw them and cringed back. holding his zapstick in one hand and gripping one of the screening room doors in the other. Farther down the corridor, between the cafeteria on one side and Ward A on the other, stood Dr. Everett Hollis, with his mouth hanging open. Now fists began to hammer on Gorky Park's locked double doors. Phil dropped his zapstick and raised the hand that had been holding it, showing the oncoming children that it was empty. "I won't be a problem," he said. "Whatever you mean to do, I won't be a problem." The screening room doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice and also 3 of his fingers. Dr. Hollis turned and fled. 2 other red caretakers emerged from the staff lounge beyond the stairway to the crematorium. They ran toward Kalisha and her makeshift cadre, both with drawn zapsticks. They stopped outside the locked doors of Ward A, zapped each other, and dropped to their knees. They continued to exchange bolts of electricity until both of them collapsed, insensible. More caretakers appeared, either saw or felt what was happening, and retreated. Some flew down the stairs to the crematorium, a dead end in more ways than one. Others back to the staff lounge or the doctor's lounge beyond it. "Come on, Shaw." Avery was looking down the hall, past Phil, howling over the spouting stumps of his fingers, and the 2 dazed caretakers. "Aren't we getting out?" "Yes, but we're letting them out first." Yeah, the line of children began to walk down the hall toward A, into the heart of the hum. Chapter 23. The end of the Institute. "I don't know how they pick their targets," Maureen was saying. "I often wondered about that, but it must work, because no one has dropped an atomic bomb or started a worldwide war in over 75 years. Think about what a fantastic accomplishment that is. I know some people say God is watching out for us, and some say it's diplomacy, or what they call MAD, mutual assured destruction. But I don't believe any of that. It's the Institute." She paused for another drink of water, and then resumed. "They know which kids to take because of a test most children have at birth. I'm not supposed to know what that test is. I'm just a lowly housekeeper, but I listen as well as snitch, and I snoop. It's called BDNF, which stands for Brain-Derived Neurotrophic Factor. Kids with a high BDNF are targeted, followed, and eventually taken and brought to the Institute. Sometimes they're as old as 16, but most are younger. They grab those with really high BDNF scores as soon as possible. We've had kids here as young as 8. That explains Avery," Luke thought, "and the Wilcox twins. They're prepared in front half. Part of the prep is done with injections, part of it with exposure to something Dr. Hendricks calls the Stasi lights. Some of the kids who come in here have telepathic ability, thought readers. Some are telekinetics, mind over matter. After the injections and exposure to the Stasi lights, some of the kids stay the same, but most get at least a little stronger in whatever ability they were taken for. And there are a few, what Hendricks calls pinks, who get extra tests and shots and sometimes develop both abilities. I heard Dr. Hendricks say once that there might be even more abilities, and discovering them could change everything for the better." "TP as well as TK," Luke murmured. "It happened to me, but I hid it. At least I tried to. When they're ready to be put to work, they move from front half into back half. They see movies that show the same person over and over. At home, at work, at play, at family get-togethers, they get a trigger image that brings back the Stasi lights and also binds them together. You see, the way it works, when they're alone, their powers are small even after the enhancements, but when they're together, their strength increases in a way. There's a math word for it. Exponentially," Luke said. "I don't know the word. I'm tired. The important thing is these children are used to eliminate certain people. Sometimes it looks like an accident. Sometimes it looks like suicide. Sometimes like murder. But it's always the kids. That politician, Mark Berkowitz, that was the kids. Jangi Ghaffur, that man who supposedly blew himself up by accident in his bomb-making factory in Kuduz province 2 years ago, that was the kids. There have been plenty of others, just in my time at the Institute. You'd say there was no rhyme or reason to any of it. 6 years ago, it was an Argentinian poet who swallowed lie, and there's none that I can see. But there must be, because the word is still here. I once heard Mrs. Sigsbee, she's the big boss, say that we were like people, constantly bailing out a boat that would otherwise sink, and I believe her." Maureen once more scrubbed at her eyes, then leaned forward, looking intently into the camera. "They need a constant supply of children with high BDNF scores, because back half uses them up. They have headaches that get worse and worse, and each time they experience the Stasi lights or see Dr. Hendricks with his sparkler, they lose more of their essential selves by the end when they get sent to Gorky Park. That's what the staff calls Ward A. They're like children suffering from dementia or advanced Alzheimer's disease. It gets worse and worse until they die. It's usually pneumonia because they keep Gorky Park cold on purpose. Sometimes it's like, oh god, like they just forget how to take the next breath. As for getting rid of the bodies, the Institute has a state-of-the-art crematorium. No, Sheriff Athworth said softly. No. The staff in back half works in what they call long swings. That's a few months on and a few months off. It has to be put that way because the atmosphere is toxic. But because none of the staff has high BDNF scores, their process works slower on them. Some it hardly seems to affect at all. She paused for a sip of water. There are two docs who work there almost all of the time, and they are both losing their minds. I know because I've been there. Housekeepers and janitors have shorter swings between front half and back half. Same with the cafeteria staff. I know this is a lot to take in, and there's more, but that's all I can manage now. I have to go, but I have something to show you, Luke. You and whoever might be watching this with you. It's hard to look at, but I hope you can because I risked my life to get it. She drew in a trembling breath and tried to smile. Luke began to cry soundlessly at first. Luke, helping you escape was the hardest decision of my life, even with death staring me in the face in hell. I have no doubt on the other side of death. It was hard because now the boat may sink and that will be my fault. I had to choose between your life and maybe the lives of the billions of people on Earth who depend on the Institute's work without even knowing it. I choose you over all of them, and may God forgive me. The screen went blue. Tag reached for the laptop's keyboard, but Tim grabbed his hand. Wait. There was a line of static, a stutter, a sound, and then a new video began. The camera was moving down a corridor with a thick blue carpet on the floor. There was an intermittent rasping noise, and every now and then the picture was interrupted by darkness that came and went like a shutter. She's shooting video, Luke thought, shooting it through a hole or a rip she made in the pocket of her uniform. That raspy noise is cloth rubbing over the mic. He doubted his cell phones even worked for making calls in the deep woods of northern Maine, but guessed they were absolutely verboten in the Institute just the same, because the cameras would still work. If Maureen had been caught, she wouldn't have just had her salary doctor lost her job. She really had risked her life. It made the tears come faster. He felt Officer Gullickson, Wendy, put an arm around him. He leaned gratefully against her side, but he kept his eyes on the laptop screen. Here, finally was back half. Here was what he had escaped. Here was where Avery undoubtedly was now, assuming he was still alive. The camera passed open double doors on the right. Maureen turned briefly, giving the watchers a view of a screening room with maybe 2 dozen plush seats. A couple of kids were sitting in there. Is that girl smoking? Wendy asked. Yes, Luke said. I guess they let them have cigarettes in back half too. The girl is one of my friends. Her name is Iris Stanhope. They took her away before I got out. I wonder if she's still alive. And if she can still think, if she is... The camera swiveled back to the corridor. A couple of other kids passed, looking up at Maureen with no appreciable interest before leaving the frame. A caretaker in a red smock appeared. His voice was muffled by the pocket in which Maureen's phone was hidden, but the words were understandable. He was asking her if she was glad to be back. Maureen asked him if she looked crazy, and he laughed. He said something about coffee, but the cloth of the pocket was rustling loudly, and Luke couldn't pick it up. Is that a pistol he's wearing? Sheriff John asked. It's a zap stick, Luke said. You know, a taser. There's a dial on them that ramps up the voltage. Frank Potter. You're shitting me. The camera passed another set of open double doors, this time on the left, went 2 or 3 dozen steps further, and then stopped at a door that was closed. Printed on it in red was Ward A, and a low voice Maureen said, This is Gorky Park. Her hand, clad in a blue latex glove, came into the frame. She was holding a keycard. Except for the color, bright orange, it looked to Luke like the one he had stolen, but he had an idea that people who worked in back half weren't so careless with these. Maureen pressed it to the electronic square above the doorknob. There was a buzz, and then she opened the door. Hell was beyond it. Now we're on to chapter 24 of The End of the Institute. Orphan Annie was a baseball fan, and she usually spent warm summer evenings in her tent, listening to the Fireflies, a minor league team out of Columbia. She was happy when one of their players got sent up to the Rumble Ponies, the Double-A franchise in Binghamton, but she was always sorry to lose them. When the game was over, she might sleep a little, then wake and tune to George Allman's show and see what was going on in what George called the wonderful world of weird. Tonight, However, she was curious about the boy who had jumped from the train. She decided to drift on over to the sheriff's station and see if she could find anything out. They probably wouldn't let her in the front, but sometimes Frankie Potter or Billy Wicklow came out into the alley where she kept her air mattress and spare supplies to have a smoke. They might tell her what the kid's story was if she asked nice. After all, she had cleaned him up and comforted him some, and that gave her a rooting interest. A path from her tent near the warehouses ran through the woods on the west side of town. When she went to the alley to spend the night on her air mattress, or inside if it was chilly, they let her do that now, thanks to Elpington with his Go Slow banner. She followed the path as far as the backside of the Gem, the town's movie theater, where she had seen many interesting movies as a younger and slightly saner woman. Old Gemmy had been closed for the last 15 years, and the parking lot behind it was a wilderness of weeds and goldenrod. She usually cut through this and went up the old theater's crumbling brick flank to the sidewalk. The sheriff's station and the Dupre Mercantile were on the other side of Main Street with her alley, so she thought of it, running between them. This evening, just as she was about to leave the path for the parking lot, she saw a vehicle turn down Pine Street. It was followed by another, and another. Three vans going just about nose to tail, and although twilight was advancing, they didn't even have their parking lights on. Annie stood in the trees, watching as they entered the lot she had been about to cross. They turned as if in formation and stopped in a row, with their noses pointed back toward Pine Street, almost like they might need to make a quick getaway, she thought. The doors opened. Some men and women got out. One of the men was wearing a sport coat and nice-looking trousers with a crease in them. One of the women, older than the others, was wearing a dark red pantsuit. Another was wearing a dress with flowers on it. That one had a purse. The other four women didn't. Most of them were wearing jeans and dark shirts, except for the sport coat man, who just stood back and watched. They moved quickly and purposefully like folks on a mission. To Annie, they looked sort of military, and this impression was confirmed in short order. Two of the men and one of the younger women opened the back doors of the vans. The men took a long steel box from one of them. From the back of another van came holster belts, which the woman handed around to everyone except for the sport coat man, another man with short blonde hair, and the woman in the flower dress. The steel boxes opened, and from this came a couple of long guns that were not hunting rifles. They were what Annie Godot thought of as school shooter guns. The woman in the flower dress put a small handgun in her purse. The man beside her stuck a bigger one in his belt at the small of his back, then dropped the tail of his shirt over it. The others holstered up. They looked like a raiding party. Hell, they were a raiding party. Annie didn't see how they could be anything else. A normally wired person, one who didn't get her nightly news from George Allman, for instance, might have merely stared in dismayed confusion, wondering what on earth a bunch of armed men and women might be doing in a sleepy South Carolina town where there was only a single bank and that one locked up for the night. A normally wired person might have whipped out her cell phone and called 911. Annie, however, was not a normally wired person, and she knew exactly what these armed men and women, at least 10 of them, and maybe more, were up to. They hadn't come in the black SUV she would have expected, but they were here for the boy, Luke Ellis. Of course they were. Calling 911 to alert the folks in the sheriff's station wasn't an option in any case, because she wouldn't have carried a cell phone even if she'd been able to afford one. Cell phones shot radiation into your head. Any fool knew that. Don't ever put a cell phone directly to your skin. Just a friendly reminder. And besides, they could track you that way. So Annie continued along the path, running now, until she reached the back of the Dupre barbershop, 2 buildings down. A rickety flight of stairs led to the apartment above. Annie climbed them as fast as she could, holding up her serape and the long skirt beneath so she wouldn't trip and take a tumble. At the top, she hammered on the door until she saw Corbett Denton through the ragged curtain. Shuffling toward her with his big belly leading the way, he pushed the curtain aside and peered out, his bald head gleaming beneath the light of the kitchen's fly-specked overhead globe. "Annie, what do you want? I'm not giving you anything to eat. There's men," she said, panting to catch her breath. She could have added there were also women, but just saying men sounded more fearsome, at least to her. "They're parked behind the Gem." "Go away, Annie. I don't have time for your foolish—" "There's a boy. I think those men to go to the station and take him away. I think there's going to be shooting." "What the hell are you—" "Please, drummer, please. They have machine guns. I'm thinking that boy's a nice boy. Open the door. Let me smell your breath." She seized him by the front of his pajama shirt. "I haven't had a drink in 10 years. Please, drummer, they came for the boy." He sniffed. frowny now. No booze. Are you hallucinating? No. You said machine guns? Do you mean automatic rifles like AR-15s? Drummer Denton was beginning to look interested. Yes. No. I don't know, but you have guns. I know you do. You should bring them. You're out of your mind, he said, and that was when Annie began to cry. Drummer had known her most of his life and had even gone stepping with her a time or two when they were much younger, and he had never seen her cry. She really believed something was going on, and Drummer decided what the hell, he had only been doing what he had did every night, which was thinking about the basic stupidity of life. Alright, let's go look. And your guns? You'll bring your guns? Hell no, I said we're going to look. Drummer, please. Look, he said, that's all I'm willing to do. Take it or leave it, with no other choice. Orphan Annie took it. And that is the end of this particular book reading. I'll finish the rest of this end of the Institute in the next video. Pick it up at chapter 25, the end of the Institute.